Welcome to In Conversation with the Safety Collaborators. I am Karen.
And I am Nuala. Whether you're a safety professional, a leader, or an individual committed to making a difference,
we invite you to join the discussion on creating a culture of safety and care, enabling your team and leaders to design a safer and more productive and collaborative world. Today, we're thrilled to have Eskild Lund Sørensen joining us. Eskild has dedicated over 2 decades to creating sustainable, safe work environments across a wide range of industries and cultures, from the icy landscapes of Greenland to the bustling projects in the United States. His people-centric approach places a strong emphasis on psychological safety, ensuring that every voice is heard and valued. A standout example of his work can be seen in his leadership on offshore wind farm construction project, where he successfully integrated inclusive communication and planning, leading to tangible improvements in both safety and project outcomes. Now, at Intactix, Eskild continues his mission through the CARE model, culture and risk evaluation, a science-based method that proactively addresses risk while fostering a positive workplace culture. His commitment to unity, care and communication shines through in every aspect of his work, making a real difference in high-reliability environments. We're excited to dive into his insights on performance, transformation and building sustainable workplaces. Welcome, Eskild.
Thank you very much, Karen, for this elaborate presentation. It's nice to hear that I have accomplished something over the last 2 decades, right? But also meeting you guys, I think, has opened my eyes to, or at least supported that the human angle is just so important when we do. Yeah, what I coined the sustainable workplaces for the reason that it's not just about the environment, it's not just about people, it's about making sure that we can thrive together across what we do.
the whole sustainable workplace, not just the one aspect, because you're right, nothing happens without it impacting or affecting other areas. So when we look at it holistically, then we can really make change and have impact.
I agree.
Can you tell us a bit about yourself and also your journey of how you got to where you are today?
Well, I think it actually all started in my childhood, to be honest, because my parents are both, they're psychiatrists, and then they gave pills to get people to get better, treating the symptoms. And around when my father was, I think, 35, maybe end of the 30s, he came across C.G. Jung, really famous psychologist, and started diving into that. And you can say the dinner table conversation at home changed because him and my mother realized that there was a different way where we go in to understand how the human actually works, to find out why it is that there is a need to change something and not just give the pills. So I was brought up from I was very little with all these conversations about the conscious and the unconscious. My great-grandfather is an engineer. So on that side, I also got very much interested in the technical side and ending up becoming an engineer. But I took this with me, and then instead of working with people, my brother decided to become a doctor. Then I thought, okay, maybe I should do something else. So I took the engineering route as an environmental engineer, because then I thought if I can cure the surroundings and the environment, or at least work on making sure that we don't harm them more than we have to, I could also contribute, but I didn't want to compete with my brother. So that's how it kind of ended up like that, the technical interest. But that then slowly changed both to looking into toxicology and the ecosystems, but actually also on the human side. You know, all the things we do, all the things we put into our system, how does that make us feel? How does it actually, what's the impact on our mood and the way we think and the way we get ready when we go to work with the environment, all the noise, all the pollution that if we live in a city, all of those kind of things, right? So from an early stage, I would say, trying to balance the technical interest with the human side. And as I grew older, got more and more interested in diving into the human impact.
It's amazing how so many of the things that we do today are rooted from experiences that we've had when we're younger. And I think I have a similar story of, why I'm so passionate about what I do today is because of things that have happened. But it's such an interesting connection, that connection between having a look at what your parents were doing and how moving away from just going, here's a quick fix, here's a quick solution, to what can you do differently, and then the technical side. So how has that impacted maybe your career path or the way that you've done things in your working environment to mold them and bring them together?
Yeah, how did that come together? So you could say the first path or the first thing I did after I got my degree was working with soil pollution in Denmark, because there's some leftovers from what we did in the past that impacted people, and it had an impact on the value of their land, which took me to this journey of, again, understanding why is it that we make the decisions today that will have an impact much further down the line. When I was at the university, I got the opportunity to do some toxicological tests on groundwater or effluents from an old chemical factory in Denmark called Cheminova. And the politicians had allowed that a lot of pesticides were dug into the sand, and so that it will just dilute into the water, which is a terrible idea. It diluted into the water, and a lot of fish and sea life basically died, and then people started to get concerned. But it was a decision that was made based on what the politician felt was right for what the public wanted. So I had that with me in that sense, and then starting to understand. So I got to work a little bit with doing audits on high-risk companies in Denmark. And one of the things that was, to me, was quite evident was that it was much more focused on compliance with a written word, which is super simple. And now that we have ChatGPT, you can just ask ChatGPT to write something that complies with. Nobody reads that, it turns out, right? You go and say, but can you show me? Yeah, this is how we do. Okay, then I have your process for how you do this. Yes, but you don't follow it. No, because it's too complicated. Or yeah, it was not me who wrote it. So that kind of put me on the track of mixing, understanding the technical side, but then also saying, okay, so there's something here with people. So that was the early stages. Like, okay, I got very, very curious about that. And then I moved to Greenland. And obviously Greenland has a very, very different culture. And I came in with my big clown shoes, my education, and said some things that was very, very unpolite. And I really, really hurt some people. And we were talking about changing out the pellets in shotguns from lead to something that wasn't lead, because lead is a problem when you eat it and you get it into your system. Then it creates all sorts of problems for us, but it also creates problems for the birds that you don't shoot. And we had this discussion, and maybe we should do, and you could take the technical side of it, change to something which is basically inert and doesn't do anything. But that was lighter. And then I started saying, okay, maybe there could be a cultural issue with this as well, and I really said something stupid, right? But kind of like a shaman, like maybe there's something cultural that will make them not want to change, because all this new stuff is not really changing. And of course, Greenlanders have adapted shotguns and motorboats and all of those kind of things. It's not because they don't want to change, but I just said something really, really stupid. And I heard one of my colleagues, and she got very mad, and she left the meeting because she was so angry. But she ended up being one of my closest friends, because first of all, I apologized to her, and I understood that I did something that was terrible. But I also really, really understood how my bias and my education just, it fits in a classroom at a university, but it doesn't fit in the real world. You need to go out and have that real experience. So I also got more interested in getting out and talking to people. I came back from Greenland and worked in the Danish Environmental Ministry, where we did an Arctic project. And again, so we had Russia, we had Canada, we had Norway, Sweden, Denmark led basically by Greenland, so people that I knew, coming together with all their political bias, all their political backgrounds, and trying to get them to share in the same way as we have Google. Google lives off of a lot of people doing stuff. That's not how it works in the Arctic. It's very spread out, right? So it needed to have something different. So we brought in the maps from all the Arctic states, and then we could add and share data on top of that. And that was extraordinary, how the experiences and what I had learned living in Greenland and working from a very small country, getting out and getting exposed to big politics, because I sat in the Arctic Council. So I met all the states, and I worked with them. I saw how their machinery worked. And we used that to get approval of this. And I think the interesting part was that the only country that actually tried to break or ruin the project, that was Denmark. They had put me in charge, most likely. Well, they had to nominate somebody, but they had not expected that it would take off. And we went from success to success. And every time I went back to work, my boss got more and more angry at me. And I find that interesting. And again, if I changed and I did something else, but I took that experience, and going back to what you said, Nuala, I took that back in, and then I started thinking about competing goals. What is it actually that we want to do? And Denmark, most likely from a political point of view, tried to spend the money in Denmark and not in the Arctic. So when we had success and we had to commit to doing stuff, at that point they were earning money on selling the maps. And you could say what we were moving towards, which was just a natural change, nothing to do with me, but a natural change. We were moving towards public access to maps. And the Danish maps are now publicly accessible. But again, why? Because back in the day, when Denmark had the largest naval fleet in the world, we put them all up for maintenance, and then I think it was the English that came and bombed everything away, and then all of a sudden we were just nothing in the naval side. But back then, the maps was actually some of the most precious things that you could have. You used them for attacking your enemies, and if you were a captain on a ship, somebody was trying to get you. The most important thing for the captain was to take the maps and make sure that nobody got their hands on them, because they would open up information that they didn't have that could be used for war against a country, not just in Denmark, which is also why we have generally in the world have laws about the fact that entities from other countries can't map inside, at least inside territorial waters. I'm not sure whether they can map inside the EC or the economic zone, but all this bias, or some of the biases, is built into us in a shape and form that we don't even know why, because 500 years ago, something was important, so now it's still important. But it actually isn't anymore, because basically everybody can see on Google Maps what's happening in Denmark, right? Also back, this is 20 years ago now, almost. So again, the competing, I had a success, right? And if you go out and do safety, you say, let's do this, we can get much better. Yes, but if we do this, then we're not going to achieve something else, which might be a KPI or super important to somebody else. So all these competing goals that we set, which is also why, as you said, like the holistic approach, right? Win-win-win, if we can do that, if we can create an environment where we win together on all the things that are important.
There's so many things that you said there, and I'm trying to kind of process, because there's so many valuable nuggets. And from the cultural side, learning about yourself and what works and what doesn't work, and having the honesty to be able to speak up and go, you know what, I really messed up there. That wasn't so good. How do I apologize, rebuild a relationship, and by the sounds of it, make that relationship even stronger by understanding that reflection in the mirror? And I've made a couple of notes, but I want to start on that one. So I think learning about ourselves and learning about what works and how sometimes we can actually be the problem in moving forward, or in a relationship, or in an organizational culture, bringing our biases in, can be so critical. And have you taken that learning, even after this Arctic experience, and have you taken that learning of understanding you into other projects that you've worked in or other teams that you've led, and what impact has that had on improving safety, production, the whole gambit?
Yeah, I think in the beginning, so I became a team lead or manager for people back in 2013. And I think at that point, a lot of those experiences were rooted in my unconscious. I don't think I was in that. There were some things that I was aware of, but most of it was something that I was not aware of. And you could say, so again, back to where did this start? And I'm not a very good football player in any way, but I really, really enjoy playing football. And I played football since I was 5-6 years old. It started in goal. I had my brother as my shot coach, and he's 6 years older than me. I was 5-6 years old, and he just gave it his all, right? And I think I learned something from that, in the sense that, you train hard to get better at what it is that you actually do. So that mood. And then apparently, so when I got a little bit older, and again, very, very low ranking football, but I was kind of the one that people gathered around, and, I talked on the pitch and tried to help with communication and all of those kind of things, and trying to help us be better. And I played 6 years of football, like competitive football, before I won my first game. We lost, and we lost with 5 and 6 and 8 goals, right? And I've always played left back, so I'm a defender. But we always came there to find out what's the best we can get out of each of us. We knew we were not very good, But again, trying to, first of all, kind of like this conversation, make sure that we have fun, but also try to do our best. And that I think I brought with me all along. Also, when I was a project manager, I did a project on ship recycling as well, before I ended up as head of QHSE mass drilling in the US, where we had 3 rigs. So that was small, and it was just a small team. But again, trying to get all these different. So we were in the US, we had a Danish entity, we were building ships in Korea, trying to tie all those things together. And with, you could say, a team that I did not have any influence on, most of it. We had a little group of HSE people where we worked together. But again, trying to get each of the rigs to perform the best that they could with the different, in that sense, different cultures and crews that they had, because they were not the same. The rig managers had different approaches to how things should be done. We had the Danish guy who had been basically building up in the US because that was the first rig. And then a new Danish guy that came in, and then a Norwegian guy. So we had this, you could say, the trilemma. I don't know if that's even an English word, but we had a person who had built it and did not want to change because everything was working and just wanted to go work. And then we had a rig with a guy who was super sharp, and he's still super sharp. And he tried out a lot of different new things. He brought in people on the physical side, the mental side, was coaching the rig people. And then you could say one who was kind of in the middle, enjoyed being in the US. It was an experience. And as long as people were happy, it was fine, right? But for me, trying to get those 3 to work together, it was not really something that was in my capabilities. And I'm not sure if I could do that today. But just seeing those 3 things working, again, really led me back to how is it that we can play each other strong. So they had 3 different approaches to get their team to work the best they could. And the 2 years I was there, Norwegian guy outperformed them by miles. And that, to me, again, just went back to all this thing with the mental focus on what it is that they do. So they performed, the rig had the best performance of a new rig in the entire history of the company. I might have had a very, very small approach or contribution to that, but the overall leadership on taking that holistic approach. And again, for me, reminding me of, chess players being very, very physically fit, which I think is amazing, because again, if you're physically fit, then you're mentally fit as well, right? And it's a long game and you need to think fast, and it's marginals that are going to make you win. So it is important when you're doing something that's high risk that you're also mentally fit, and have psychological safety, of course, also that you can speak up when you see things, right? If you're afraid of that, you're not going to learn. So, but when I got the job and moved to the US, I had a dream that I could get an NFL coach, American football coach, in to inspire us. Could also be in college football, right? But what they train, so they plan a lot, right? And they have 150 games maybe, and they have games that fit for specific things. So when you see this, then you do that, right? And some of the quarterbacks, they have this very long book, basically glued to their arm, so they can go through, okay, now I can see the defenses lining up like this. These are the 3 most effective games that we can play. I'm fascinated by that. When we put management systems in place that not a lot of people can access. And if you access them, and back, so this is, of course, it's 10 years ago. Now you can say, okay, you can have a smartphone when you can have access, but it's not readily available. You need to go down and find that thing. And then usually you would have had the person building the management system saying, but it needs to be understood by everyone. Even my psychologist at home, she should be able to understand this. So the ISO 45001 standard says, you build your company around competent people. We don't build it around writing a lot of stuff. So it has been realized that writing a lot of stuff, that's not effective. So getting that, again, sports coaches and the US, of course, this is big, right? Getting the information out, super digested. So it's like, okay, when this happens, then we just do this or this or this. It's not go and read a manual that's 150 pages. It's not going to work. Read something that's written so that a child can understand it. If you're a highly skilled technician, you're just going to go, I'm sorry, what? So now it's written in 10 pages. I just need 4 lines that says, that valve, turn it left with this screw. Done. Not a lot of complicated, because then it's just going to fly.
It's just listening there, some different thoughts were going through my mind. And something you said about physical fitness, and in fact, in the industry in general, particularly the offshore industry, it's actually becoming a serious issue. And I wonder how that's playing into the whole mental health conversation as well. That's almost another podcast, but yeah, because there's some real challenges, particularly up here in the North Sea. I almost wanted to be a little controversial just for a minute. So we talk about football or some sport. Now, the beautiful thing about sport is that you get to spend 95% or more practicing, and then you do the job. In the working world, we spend 95% doing the job, and with a bit of luck, we might get some practice time. How do we manage that? Because it's we would love to spend more time practicing. I know I've spent many times talking with teams and coaching teams on the work site, sort of say, slow down to speed up, spend more time doing the planning, doing the practicing. And when I say practice, I mean, making sure that you've planned correctly, and take more time doing that and then go and do the job will generally actually be more efficient. The challenge is helping people to recognize that you need to spend that hour for a 10-minute job.
Got a beautiful example of that in one of the rigs I was on, because it was
Yeah.
such a new team, a lot of change in personnel, and I was able to get, I think it was about 2 hours, which with each crew. So the crew and then the crew that were going there back to back, so the shift change before we actually started, and it was a super critical operation. Absolute green hands, new experienced drilling team that had never worked together before. And it was one of the safest, fastest sections of that piece of the job. And the next day, when we were in the morning meeting and doing a review, the guys were all like, that was amazing. Did you see how awesome the team were? And when I said to them, what do you think the difference was? Not one person spoke up from the leadership team and said, spending those 2 hours made such a difference because everybody was on the same page. They didn't actually compute the success with the time that had been spent in the conversations. And it was quite a horrifying moment for them when I said, okay, but do you remember what we did and then the conversation that we had, and we went through all the expectations and the concerns and what have you? So do you think that possibly played a little bit of a role? And then they were like, oh, yes, that did make a difference. It was like this little light bulb moment. But the problem is that people don't compute the saving that you make because they haven't had the crisis on the other side. And there's a brilliant Audible book that I've started listening to. I haven't finished it. I'll have to try and find what it was. And her whole thing is around, you prepare for the crisis or you prepare for the job. People never know the impact that you have saved. And I think that comes into it as well, is maybe we need to do a little bit of a case study around that, or start doing some exploration into actually seeing that and starting to record the results of what is the potential time lost that we have saved by you spending 2 hours having a better conversation before you get into it.
I think that's at the heart of what we actually do. All three of us is helping people to acknowledge that piece. But human beings, we want to get the job done. We want to get on with it. And if we've done it many times before, you're going to make me do what? Stand here now for 2 hours to talk about something I've been doing for 10 years. The human side is the tricky bit. And just to our listeners, I am being very quiet today because today, whilst we're recording, the builders, not my builders, sadly, but the builders next door are banging away on the roof, just in case you hear it.
Yeah, I'm just sitting and thinking that this is maybe kind of a light bulb moment for us, right? Or at least one of these where unconscious understanding of something becomes very conscious.
Yeah.
So what is it? And again, if you look at corporations, they would have a budget for each individual should have $2,000 of training every year. That's our budget. And then we can see what that can bring. Instead of saying, okay, so, and I know, of course, then you can negotiate and you can do all these things, right? But technically what they want to do is some kind of compliance. What is the bare minimum of capacity or capability building that we can do so that we fulfill requirements, compliance requirements, or external, it could be what is perceived as best available technology or best available skill set. And oil and gas bullshit training, right? You get to one of the things, if you do Hewitt, of course, because that's helicopter underwater escape training. I don't remember, it's an hour maybe in a pool where you put in a simulator that supposedly should look like a like a helicopter, should it ditch in the ocean, you get tied in, you get flipped around, and then you crawl out the window. And that window, so I'm 180, not particularly big, and I'm not particularly wide, and I'm just under 100 kilos, right? Easy to get out of the window. And you go, okay, yeah, that was easy. Did scuba diving, turn upside down inside an aquarium is fine. Go out, go up, that was that. Do it 2 times, 3 times. And then I never did it again, right? But I flew helicopters. And the windows of the helicopters is like a quarter of the size. I would never be able to get out the window. So now I trained something that makes absolutely no sense, because if I ditch in a helicopter, I need to go to that former NFL player who weighs 150 kilos that we call Hulk and push him away from the door, because that's the only place I can get out. Not going to happen, right? So the only option for me to feel safe in a helicopter is to sit at the seat next to the door. So if we ditch, I can get out the door, because I can't get out the windows. Smart training, yes, we have trained. Makes 0 sense, and it's a waste of money. So we say that training, that goes the wrong way. Then there's all the training that makes people smarter. So the training that you did on the rig obviously had an impact that is significant and is going to stay, because it's something that they're going to use every day. So when I did the culture program together with some fantastic people on Racebank, we said plan, and it goes back to The Art of War, which is a Chinese book about making sure that if you want to make sure that you win when you go to war, then you plan the hell out of things, right?
Sun Tzu.
Exactly. My Chinese is so I can say xi.
Ah.
I believe might mean thank you, but I've also traveled in Vietnam, and then ga and ga, I think. One is chicken and the other one is train station. So I stay
Which
away.
one are you eating today?
Oh, roast. Very nice. No, but yeah, but training that makes sense and that will last. So planning, super important, right? So we call it plan, care, communicate. It should, again, keep thinking about it. It should have been plan, communicate, care. So the intent of communicate is, of course, that if you have a plan and you have 200 people on a project, where 50 people is from an organization and 150 are suppliers that are coming in and doing stuff. That's how we do things in wind. Many more people now but just, there's a ratio, right? Make sure that everybody knows the plan. Also the ones that you brought in from the outside. Make sure that we work together as a unit and that we understand what it is that we are trying to do, so that anybody who sees us falling off the cart can care, and who cares about what we do. So there's an energy management part of it, make sure that we come fit for work, but there's also the care for the plan. We have a plan, the plan don't work. We raise our hand and say, we need to change something. And then we start all the change management, all the psychological safety starts to go in again and go, okay, let's make sure that we also understand why it is we need to change, so that we can get people on board. And there's techniques for that, ADCAR and all of those wonderful things, right? But that was the whole idea, because we had so many, we had 19 different nationalities. And just to, kind of remember that, we made a little short video where everybody said the slogan of the build, which was together we build, and then the word would be together we build safely, together we build efficiently, all of those kind of things, right? And we got the CEO to also say, so he was from Switzerland, and then we had Australians, Brazilians, Portuguese, Danish, and Chinese, all our funny accents, right? Like, just to remind ourselves that just because we have learned how to see the world in a significant way, that doesn't matter. And I took it a little bit away from the training, but it still goes back to, so it's culture and it's competence, right? If we want to make sure that this works, our culture needs to be, we need to be aligned about what it is that we try to do, and we need to be competent in what it is that we do. Because if we're not competent, then we go back to, I think I should do it this way. Why? Yeah, because I read the management system. And when I read it, and when Karen, you read it, and Nuala, you are from South Africa, not to say, because normally I would say this to Australians.
I am Australian.
You're also Australian, yes. You are upside down, right? And it comes from the fact that when I was, my first job, my manager at my performance review said, Eskild, you think everything you do, you think upside down. Yeah, maybe I think differently from what you do, that's fine. But it's just to give that perspective that said, you actually have something to bring. When you think upside down, that's a good thing. Because if you just think everything lights up, there's something wrong. And you don't ask that critical question, say, but are we actually sure that this is how it's supposed to go? And if you think things upside down, or as I was taught when you read anything you write, to make sure that it's coherent or there's no spelling mistakes, you read from the back instead of read. Because if you read from the front, then will start taking over and saying, yeah, but I know this. Going back to the training, right? I know this. You will start skipping things. So if you do it backwards, all of a sudden you will force your brain to actually consider what is it that it says. Does it make sense?
Interestingly, on that one, but my mother used to do proofreading. And they would always proofread, because we read from left to right. They would proofread from right to left, because our brain does. It fills in words, it fills in letters. I mean, I did that the other day. I was reading a billboard on the highway while I was driving and got momentarily distracted because I was like, that just said what? And then I went, oh, all right, I just added in a different letter and it made it a completely different word in my head that made no sense whatsoever. So, yeah.
There's a whole lot of cultural diversity in all of this conversation, which we love, and hence we do quite a bit of work for all of those reasons, because you can't assume that everybody's going to share information the same way or make decisions the same way or communicate the same way or understand even what success looks like in the same way. So we talk a lot about the 12 dimensions of culture, which those were some of them. And there's polarities across all of that. So part of the conversation when we're going to a job, I think, as you're saying, is we need to take all of these other elements into consideration, as well as our own individual diversity, if you want. So what do I consider to be my strength? What does somebody else consider it to be my strength? Or how do I annoy people? How do they annoy me? Right? All of this needs to be sort of taken into consideration when we're working together as teams. So I was just thinking this might be a nice segue to go a little bit deeper into, in fact, what Intactix does and the CARE tool framework. You give it the right names, because I think it's a great name for a tool.
Yeah, but that I think is interesting, and I think I will use that segue to just start maybe slightly different, but it will lead to that, because what the CARE tool does is it helps us see things in a different way. Yeah, the other day I read this article about Alzheimer's disease, which I actually think fits quite well with what it is that we do with the CARE tool. So a decade ago or so, scientists thought that the cause of Alzheimer's was, and now I'm going to say particle because I don't remember, but it's thing in the body that you can recognize, and then you can find a blocker, so that if that doesn't crawl around in your head, you won't get Alzheimer's. And then we spent at least a decade, maybe even more, on research and science trying to find out how to make sure that doesn't happen, because then we don't want to have Alzheimer's. But it turns out that that's not the cause. And maybe again, going back to this with Keminova, right? There's some people that have decided that this is the right thing, and then we throw a lot of money at big pharma, basically, to try and find a solution. But it turns out that it's deficiency in the immune system in the brain. You could say, but where does that come from? Is it accelerated by some of the things we put our brain through? What's the causes of this? Or is it we see more Alzheimer's now, or is it just because back in the day, 100 years ago, you died if you had Alzheimer's, then you got too slow and you couldn't find it, and you couldn't find your meat, and then you died off all your vegetables, if that was what you lived off. But spending so much time looking at the thing that has absolutely no impact, right? We started doing safety with saying, okay, we're going to tell people, we're going to write processes, and then we came to some kind of a halt, stop being that efficient. Oh, we need to do safety differently. And now when I hear people, I'm like, if I'm going to say, but we do things differently, I'm like, I almost get sick, because I think safety differently has in kind of the same way. It's a philosophy. We need to do things differently. We need to take these things into account, but it's not more than a philosophy. So that's why CARE, the tool, is so relevant, right? Because if you want to change behavior, you need to have a tool that will help you change your behavior. If you spend too much time looking on your screen or your cell phone, you can put it in a box and you can lock it in, and then you can't hear it, which is not smart if your school is calling you because your kid has fallen. But you can do that, then you will force yourself to do something differently. But what the CARE tool basically does, and built on science, figure out, but what is it, where is it that we need to look, what is it that we need to do so that we can prove that we work safely? Because not reporting In the old way we do safety, not reporting is the safest way of doing things. It's not stopping to do work because we want to do work. But if you don't report things, then you would have an organization that's super safe. Or you can make your own framework, because a lot of these organizations, if you look at wind as an example, they all have their own ways of reporting. They have set their own frame for what they're reporting. Legislation is now going to come in and change that. You need to report into your value chain. If you go to China and you ask them, what's a big problem? What's a big issue? But that's if more than 100 people die. If you go to Denmark and say, okay, if we are building a hospital in Denmark, we need to report before 100 people are killed. We still accept that people are being killed, and we try all the best to get to zero incidents. But zero incidents is not possible. Somebody will cut their finger or something very, very small. So what the science tells us is that you need some of the elements that have been proven over time. Again, this is proven, we use it. So high reliability organizations, nuclear, airlines, and just Boeing is not an airline. They are a supplier to the airline industry. So if you get a crappy airplane from Boeing, you should go back to your supplier and say, you have material impact on me when you create an airplane that falls out of the sky all the time. Not smart for me, but now I also have to report it under the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. I have to report if my supplier is making basically a workplace for me that will kill people working in my airline. Super important also in oil and gas, wind. We have an oil and gas incident from 2017 with a fatality built by a very, very well-known company in Asia. And they build basically a death trap. So when you do maintenance, there's a big likelihood you'll be killed because it's made in a bad way. So what Eskild does, it has, through science, has proven that there's 3 things that's super important if you want to have a reliable and a resilient organization. Not just on safety, but the trick is it's easy to see on safety. So if we work with environment, you could say the impact, we will only see that 10 years, 5 years, 30 years down the line. If it's finance, some people will say, oh, this is something we can't really tell. If it's safety, somebody who gets killed at work, you need to report that to the authorities, and it will get in the media, right? So we found out, science behind this has proven that if you are able to find the risk early and understand why that situation happened, because this is where a lot of organizations, they focus on when things actually went wrong. So it could be near misses, and it can be actual incidents. Okay, what's the potential? The potential was big. We will go out and investigate. And sometimes you will investigate something that has very little potential just because you have to, or somebody got upset. So the proactive part of it, we call it mindfulness because that's the terminology that's also used in high reliability. Some would take mindfulness more as drinking a cup of herbal tea. And that's also okay because it's still about, but herbal tea is very much about the fact that you need to be in balance. And mindfulness is very much about being that your system is in balance. So seeing where is it that things that could potentially cause a fatality, serious injury, big environmental harm, where is it that we see that the system is not in control? Where is it that the controls basically are failing? And again, ISO 45001 says the same thing. You have to measure the efficiency of your system. So we go in and look at where basically if you had a bowl of water, where is it that there's holes in the bowl? We're not Swiss cheesing this. Where is it that's holes? Where is it that water could run out? And if the water runs out, it runs out on a little city that will kill 30 people in China. And do we investigate what the reason was? So that's the mindfulness part of it. Then there's the organizational learning. As we talked about, one thing, you can train people, but if it's only those 2 people that get it and they forgot to tell everybody else, have a fantastic incident from the wind industry where we had an incident and 2 other projects that was running. One was in the past, one was in concurrent. They said, why did you call? Second was, the old project said, yes, we had that incident before, so we didn't know. And the other guys just said, okay, this is interesting. We will see if we can do something about it. But it was not the culture to share across. And I think wind is behind on that. So organizational learning, making sure that it's not the individuals. Oh, you need to call Paul because he knows. Mm. And we measure that to, you could say, the whole system. Do we actually investigate what matters? And do we do corrective actions? And do we care about those corrective actions? Do we check whether they're implemented and actually done? Again, sometimes corrective actions would be a pencil whip, right? You would say, change the process. We change the process and then you whip it again. Yeah, but we made a corrective action. Everything was fine. until it happens again, because it was not the process that was the fault. Maybe the process wasn't even followed. Doesn't matter. It looks nice. Don't do that. Make sure that you care about your corrective action. Make sure that it works. And that's the third leg of it. We call it sensitivity to operations. So when you do a change, have you actually considered whether it lowers the risk out in the real world? A lot of things happen where it does not lower the risk. And again, from the US oil and gas, we had our rig in for service. It came back out where they had done a technical change. Something that was welded was now bolted. Our process didn't reflect that because they didn't tell us. It's just the newest technology. And then that thing dropped because nobody checked whether the bolts were actually secured. That could have killed somebody. So when you do a change, do we actually see a reduction in the risk sensitivity to operations? And we measure that through a critical inventory, saying all these things that could kill people, or where you have had incidents, maybe you didn't think about it, but you had an incident that could have killed a person in this area. Have you made sure that it is risk assessed, that people are competent? And we had some fun conversations with people here as well, organizations where they say, competence training, that's very difficult. It actually isn't. And it's not just sending them to do a training. It's measuring whether that training has an impact on how they do their work. Just in the same way as if you take a driver's license, you go to a secure area. We talked about training earlier also here in this, right? You go to a secure area where you train in a setting where if something goes wrong, very, very little damage will happen and you're not going to hurt other people. Drive around in a little secluded area and then you do small things to begin with. Then you go drive with a teacher that has pedals that can stop you if you're doing something crazy, or unfortunate, then they can stop you. And then you go and show a policeman, now you got enough competency and understanding of your surroundings so you can drive without causing too much problems. And then you start your competence building, right? You know the law, now you know how to drive, now you go practice. And for some reason, because we, at least in Denmark, we just let people drive until they're 75, skills get worse because nobody checks up on, are you actually driving as you're supposed to? Does it work? No, I had 3 incidents where I drove into a road sign and I had all these things. Why? Yeah, because and then I had 3 speeding tickets, not me personally, right? But if that is the way, so you do your training and then you go out and then you use it for something that it was not intended to. You drive too fast. Then you're not competent. Then basically, and that's what happened, right? Your driver's license is taken away and you come back. If somebody reports you, because you're not going to go yourself and go, okay, maybe I should take a training so I understand this, because I have this feeling that if I go out and do this job, I'm actually not really sure how to do it. And we meet people, and you know, we all do that when we're driving around, right? But the competency assessment is super important because it's not about having done this job for 20 years. It's about having the capabilities to do the job safely and then actually also doing it safely. So that's the 3 measures.
I think that last piece that you just said is so important and a bit of an aha moment. We always talk about competency-based training, but in reality, it's about skills first, then get some knowledge, then get some competence, and then understand the standards and the requirements needed. And it's not until you've got the first 3 that you can actually then say, am I competent? Am I able to do this? And I think part of that competency is also, does the person have the motivation, the focus, the commitment to being competent as well? So there's some of that other human capacity in there also.
Yeah, and I agree with that. And then there's, I call it professional pride. That links to this as well. Because if you just did, let's say I did my Hewitt training, helicopter underwater escape training, and then I worked in oil and gas for 5 years. And of course, there's intervals. Okay, so maybe that's not a good example because that's something where you actually have to go back. It runs out for the same reason, right? It only lasts for 4 years, and you have to go back and do it. But if you did it, and then you only takes 2 years, and then you go to your manager. So if you say you have to have psychological safety to do this, right? Go. You know what? I know that this training is important, and I did it 2 years ago. And I know that technically I have to wait 2 more years to where I'm forced to do it. But I don't feel safe. I would like to do the training again. We don't have the budget for it. It's not just because you think it's fun to go away for 2 days. Is it because you think it's fun to be swimming in a swimming pool for 2 days? There's a lot of things that could come up with why. So that could be one thing. But if you have, again, you made the unconscious conscious with yourself, I'm actually not competent, I need the training. You need to be able to raise your hand and say, but I'm not competent. There's a lot of people that don't want to do that. And I saw some American posts recently on LinkedIn that talked about the fact that you should, like a very, very, and a lot of people supporting it, saying you should not treat your employees like their children. And I had, going back to making their conscious, I've used that analogy a lot. And I also know why. And I spoke to the person who posted it afterwards. And then I said, but this is how I treat my children. First of all, I treat them with respect. So if they come to me and they ask a question, or if they say something that they have experienced, I do my very best to listen to them and understand where they're coming from. And sometimes, obviously, I fail. And sometimes I get very angry at my children. So that it's not the anger part of it. It's the accepting that they see the world in a way that I don't see it. And then they have absolutely no professional pride. If I'm cooking and they want to learn cooking, they come over and they basically push me and say, let me help you with doing that, or I want to, or teach me how to do this. If you're a quality manager who's been at the job for 20 years and you build your world around your image that says you are super competent, and somebody comes and pokes to that, you might not agree. Basically, if you build your world around a story that you told that says, if you do these things, it's going to be effective. Incident investigations, I think, is a very, very interesting storyline to go down. If you use some of the big ones, Taproot, Kelvin Top said, it's super easy to be led to a point where the solution is, but you need to change the process. And you tick box it, and then they say, oh, but we've spent all this time. It's super important. If the process is not right, you need to change it. Going back to the culture. It's not the process that's not right. It's the culture and it's the competence for why is it that we even have to have this process in the first place? What is it that it's helping us doing? What's the outcome? Again, it's in the ISO standard. Again, so I sat in a role where we looked at more than 100 companies' safety management systems. ISO certified, not ISO certified. What they were trying to achieve with the processes was not clear. I've been in organizations myself, I was like, but there's plenty of processes where the outcome of the process is not clear. And if the outcome is not processed, it's impossible to be competent. So again, if you go driving, what's the competence? Yes, making sure that you don't kill anybody when you're driving around. In Denmark, at least you will be fined if you leave your car keys in the car and thereby you don't lock it and you walk away. You have given something that can be used for killing people to other people. So that's what's the fine is built about. I left my car keys once in my motorcycle where I met a policeman who told me this, basically the same thing, much easier. There's no doors around the motorcycle, right? And he just told me to remember not to do it because I was 2 meters away from it, but I actually had my back turned to it on a small road in the suburbs of Copenhagen. But it's just super important that we know what it is. And again, going back to the training, why is it that we do this training? Because this is the value that it brings. If you cannot prove what the value is, then why do the training? I'm not going to be excited about doing the training anyways, but if you can come back and you can bring value to the organization, much more fun to come to work. It's much more fun being around people that come and bring all these things that can make us better.
And on the training one, that whole thing of, because there's some competencies, you have to go and do training every 4 years for certain things, you have to do this. And people go, oh, pull my hair out, I'm going to be so bored out of my mind. And as an organization, yes, there are some things that you just got to do because you got to do them. But are there ways, and I mean, we're not going to go into it today, but just that challenge to everyone who's listening, are there ways that when people come back from these supposedly like frustrating or boring trainings, that you can actually create it into a learning environment? What did you learn? Was there anything that you want to share to the rest of the team that was interesting? And set those questions up before you go out on that training, because then your focus is there. You're not going, okay, I've got to tick the box and I've got to get my updated certificate. Going, oh, when I get back to work, I'm going to have to answer these 5 questions. So let me go and find the answers whilst I'm doing it. I could have an entire podcast just about that subject.
Yeah, I think that's an amazing thought, Nuala. And yeah, again, maybe, as you said, for the listeners, drop a line to you guys or comment on the post of this. Good training would be nice to know about, but also particularly how do you make sure that you bring value once you've been on training? How do you bring value when you come back? If it's just we only have one that can go on this year, or we're piloting, we're trying to find out which of these 3 ones are the best. come back and do a presentation or, whatever it is. I think that's super interesting how that is done or could be done.
Yeah.
Could also be
You know,
something.
there are ways and means.
There is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There is. A lot of what we've been speaking about is how we elevate our people, how we improve, bring in the cultural diversity, work to strengths, procedures or processes. But often as an organization, you don't even know where to start. How do I actually even start with improve my safety culture, building a sustainable workplace? So if you had to give advice to an organization wanting to do that, wanting to improve safety culture and build sustainable workplaces, what advice would you give them?
For one, I would start with considering what the corporate unconscious is all about. What is it that we currently do, and start critically thinking about why it is that we do it. I think that you could say it's something you can do on your own, but it's also something that you can do. You always meet people at work where you can feel that you have the kind of the same mindset, but where you start thinking critically about it. And again, a lot of science gone into this already, right? There's this experiment, I think it was on Stanford quite a long time ago, where you have 5 monkeys that you put into a room, and then you put a chair, and then you hang bananas up top. And then you let them in, and at some point, one of them is going to get hungry, jumps up on the chair, and tries to get the banana. Once that happens, they are all sprayed with cold water. And then you take one of the monkeys out, and then you put a dry monkey in. And then you let them walk around, and at some point, the dry monkey is going to go, I'm hungry, I'm going to get the banana. And then the 4 monkeys are going to run over and beat up the monkey because they don't want to get wet water. And then you do the same thing over and over until you only have monkeys that have never experienced being sprayed with water, because now the monkeys just do it on their own. So then you have monkeys that don't eat anything. They will walk around in the room and there will be bananas, but they're not going to touch them. And they don't know why, because they do, because somebody beat them up, but they don't know why they were beaten up. And I think there's a lot of that kind of culture. So try and start with that. And then the second thing would be, so if we're talking a culture of safety, if everything is about measuring, it's not about lagging indicators, but it is a lagging indicator, but if you use total recordables, so something that people have reported, if that is your measure of safety, then you do not have a culture that has anything to do with working safely. Then you have a compliance culture where you would want to fulfill requirements to the board, or you would want to maybe your head of QHSE knows that the authorities think that that's interesting. Maybe you report it to your industry association, IDC, G+, or whatever they're called, for some reason, because that's what we've always done. The problem with that, so total recordables or lost time incidents, those kind of things, was invented, if we can call it that. There were some authorities that needed to measure something on industry basis. Say, okay, so what is it? We have more people that are dying in construction, agriculture, manufacturing than we have in high fashion somewhere. So then it's the measure of industries. It's something which is total, but it doesn't say anything about individual companies, because again, if you don't have psychological safety, you will just not report it. If you have a lot of suppliers, you might have decided on your scope of reporting that you don't report it for some reason. So if that is the case, then you have a culture of compliance. And in a good day, you do not have a proactive culture. And it's not about leading indicators, because all these things and again, lots of studies, and Shell has done this as well, what we call leading indicators, having done toolbox talks. So it's a leading indicator of what? So if you don't have a leading indicator of something that you can link to the outcome that you don't want, then it's not a leading indicator. Then it's just another indicator, and basically still a lagging indicator. There's a band story, and they have these lists of things that they want done. How many bottles of champagne, and the pillow colors, and all of those wonderful things. And one of these bands said, we want M&Ms in our. That was the last thing on their, is it called a roller? I don't remember. Anyways, it was the last thing on their list of what they had to do. Put a bowl of M&Ms into the room. Well, they were not connected, so that was early. And then the last one was take out all the blue ones. So they knew that if they came in, they thought they knew that when they came into the room and there was no blue M&Ms in the bowl, that they had read all the list and done all the things. The problem with that is, if they think like me, going back to thinking upside down, I read newspapers from the back side to the front side. I read magazines from the back to the front. And I have no idea why. I must have an unconscious experience, but that's what I do, which means that if I got this, I would read the last thing and say, okay, there need to be M&M and the blue ones are out. Maybe I would read the rest, but it's not an indicator. The only indicator for that is I read that list line that says, take out the blue. You don't know. So the real trick here would be to measure. So go in and measure the culture. If you measure the culture as done by Energy Institute, as an example, they measure your opinion. So Karen, if I go to you and I ask you, I say, please, what is your opinion about safety here? Oh, I think it's going wonderful because I'm sitting in Scotland. Everything is wonderful. I will give it the highest mark. I will give it a 5. Nuala, if I ask you the same question, you're going to say, yeah, Joburg, there's some issues here. Not everything is wonderful. I will give it a 3. Oh, only a 3. Let's have some meetings where we can talk more about this. And you're going to go, but I have all these other things I need to do. So what I'm teaching you, that would be that if you say that safety is doing well, you're left alone. If you say it's going to go crap, you have to go in and do a lot of work. So it is not a way to measure culture at all. So measure mindfulness, organizational learning, and sensitivity to operation. When we do something, do we reduce the risk? Do we find the things that we need to find? And do we talk about them? And do we make sure that we talk so much about them that everybody in the organization know what's the right thing? Because again, if you go back to risk matrices, at least I have seen a lot across industries where one of them says, for frequency, has this been heard about in the industry? And the reason for that, it's bad wording, right? The reason for that is, what you want to say is, has this actually happened? Is the documentation of this happening? Because if we have 100 incidents that are like that, then at least there's some, the frequency over the last 5 years, the frequency, we have 20 of these every year in the industry. And then we can feel about that, oh, is it a lot or is it not a lot? But when we phrase it, has it been heard about? That means if I call up Karen, if I call you up, Nuala, and if I call up some of my friends and tell them, then more people have heard about it. And we can see Donald Trump, how he's rolling that. The more people that have heard about this, the more true it is. That's not true. There's a lot of people that do things the wrong way. There's a reason why we put signs up that says this is how to get out of a rip current, because your natural instinct is going to be swim the other way. And then at some point you will be out of energy and you will drown unless you're rescued. So when people say, just use common sense. But what is common sense? Common sense is what everybody else does. So my children that are 6 and 9, they should drink energy drinks because that's what they drink in their class. They drink energy drinks. No, they should not. They should not have artificial sweetener because artificial sweeteners will harm your body. But a lot of people do it. Oh, it's common sense. Everybody does it. No, it's not common sense. It's just what everybody does. And you can take Taylor Swift. I'm fascinated by Taylor Swift. She was kind of like the school outcast, and now she is the most followed musician, maybe the person in the world, right? And whenever she releases something, all her little minions, and it's meant in the best way, click their heels and do whatever they're told. Not saying that's a good thing, but she has been able to communicate something to people so that they listen. And that's part of the culture. When we say something, do we respect what is being said enough to care about what it is that we hear and align that with, does it make sense? And we have this, again, the way normally we say if you present something and you go, does that make sense? Leading question to a yes or no. Does that make sense? Tell me how it makes sense to you, or explain back to me how this makes sense to you. Because if you can't explain it, you haven't. If the person you're talking to cannot say this, it didn't make sense. They didn't hear, or maybe they were distracted. Again, we only have one processing, word processor in our head, right? So if we are distracted, it could be by slides where there's a lot of words on, so I start reading while I'm talking, and maybe there's people that are making noise outside, so you have 3 different things that disturb you. Then you don't hear anything. And we know that for a fact, if I sit and read something, people can come over and tell me something, I might recognize that they say something, and just to get them to go away, go, and then they go, okay, it was a question, I didn't hear what you said, right? And that culture, Can we speak openly? Do we have psychological safety? Is it okay if I come and tell you what you're doing, you can do better? It does not have to, you don't even have to phrase it that this is unsafe. You could just say, let me show you. But if you have a culture of blind compliance, or if you have a culture of doing what the boss says, you will be led into situations where things are not as you think they are, but you believe that they are. So again, you think there's a bridge. If you actually look, you know there's no bridge, but your boss said just go, and then you just go. That's how you get into danger, right? And we have a lot of people where, again, I have done this before. I know how it should be done. I haven't done it for 5 years. So no, you're not competent.
No.
Is competent up there? I think that would be the last thing.
Interesting. Throughout this entire conversation, I think the key thing that I keep hearing in different formats, it all comes back to conversation, not communication, but conversation. And in reality, nothing happens without it, whether it's an internal conversation or an external conversation. And the more and the longer I'm on the planet, the more I realize this to be a truth. And I think there's an interesting thing as well as truth. What is truth? I remember years ago, I think it was very common to say that the truth of the matter is, according to whom? Right?
Yeah.
It's not, there's no such thing unless there's a group of people who have agreed that's how we're going to do something, or that makes sense to us. Otherwise, there is no such thing, or it's a very expensive item at the very top shelf of some store. All of this, when we want to wrap this up into something, if you're going to look at a culture of organization, and it is organizational culture, yes, safety is a component of that, and we want people to consider their actions when they're doing work to make sure that things, but it has to also meet the business outcomes. It isn't a standalone whirligig thing that we have to do. Interesting. In the essence of time, I think we have one question, and you're only allowed a sentence to answer this, just to be difficult. So a question
You're allowed
is,
to take time to process the question.
correct, right? If you were granted one miracle that would change safety culture in the industry, what would that miracle be?
Yeah, that is definitely one of those questions that will make the small gray ones wish that they had a couch or something they could go and rest them while trying to sneak out of work. Yeah, one sentence.
Wow, loose sentence.
But it's. I think it has been said earlier in this podcast. I would really, really, really want people to genuinely care about life. Life is so, I know this is 2 sentences, but life is so short and fragile. We cannot waste it on living how we do right now. We need to change the way we do, and that change comes through care in the sense that it's empathy, it's emotional intelligence, and it's daring to understand that there is more than one truth.
Yeah.
So maybe,
Nice.
external thinker, going back to all this thing about how is it that we are and trying to explain that to other people, right? For me, a realization that I've had is that sometimes I need to say things out loud for me to actually understand what it is that I say. And people have laughed at me because I've had days at work where I go into a room and then I talk to myself and then I do notes on a whiteboard. So the miracle would be that people have the courage to accept that there's more than one truth.
Wow, I think that would change the world that we live in.
Completely. That is just so on point.
Yeah.
And especially, Karen, you and I often talk about the fact that we're not trying to be difficult. We're just different. And I think it links so beautifully that there is more than one truth.
Yeah.
And even when it is that we end up walking into a situation in our big clown shoes and we kind of mess it up and then go, okay, how do I recover from that and care? You know? And you've mentioned so many times, care about the plan, care about the people, care about what we're doing, and care about this beautiful life that we have, short and fragile.
Beautiful. That has been a very enlightening. I know I'm walking away from this conversation, and Nuala, you have done an outstanding job of taking notes, because I can see them there, and really trying to capture the essence of a lot of what you've been saying, Eskild. There's a lot of food for thought here, and I would encourage all of you listening to this to really sit in a quiet place and listen to this conversation and understand what care might look like for you.
Thank you for joining us today. It is always lovely to have conversations that matter. To learn more about creating a culture of safety and care, please visit our website, safetycollaborations.com, to access our show notes, resources, and guides. Leave us a message via the Message Us section on the show notes page, and we'll get back to you.
You can also join our community on social media by following us on our LinkedIn pages, Safety Collaborations, Karen Avari, and Nuala Gage, and on our new Safety Collaborations social channels, YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram. Our handle, Safety Collaborations, is much the same. Sharing is caring. Follow us on your favourite podcast platform. Leave us a 5-star review would be awesome. Doing these things helps us to grow and share our collective conversations. Till next time,
Stay safe
and stay well.